Good afternoon once again. This is Pastor Pete coming from our church offices. It's a Wednesday afternoon, early in June, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my hero, Harlan Popov. I've mentioned him in sermons before. He was a Bulgarian pastor. I think pastor of the largest Pentecostal church in Bulgaria at the time when the communists took over at the end of World War II. And he was terribly persecuted, as were all Christians. He wound up spending over 13 years in prison, torture, and a lot of times in a labor camp, just being worked almost to his death. And he tells about a time that he was sent down into a dark hole just for punishment. The communists came up with all kinds of horrible ways to just be hateful to people, and he was put into this dark subterranean cell. It was so dark and it was damp all the time. You couldn't even lie on the floor hardly because it was so wet. And it was absolute darkness. The only thing, once a day, I think a little slot in the door opened up and they pushed in like a rotten potato with worms and a couple other rotten vegetables. He just barely was kept alive. And it was horrible. And he talks about how the absolute darkness he lived in. And he says, for the first time in over a year, I began to fear for my sanity. Had I been here for a day, or 20 days, for an hour, or for a week? Only occasionally I would hear a voice. An iron grate would open and a metal plate be scooted on the floor with a little water and 3 or 4 carrots with a rotten potato with worms in it. I now resigned myself to spending the rest of my life here. Mentally, I'd accepted it. See, the guard who had put him on there said, "You are never, ever going to see the light of day again." So he had reason to believe this was the end of his life. One day while I was praying, the hopelessness of my situation struck me full force. Starved, beaten, forgotten here. I knew there was no hope of ever getting out. It was a high-ranking officer who told me I would rot here, and he meant business. Tears came to my eyes. For weeks I had been like this. "Oh God," I cried. Then something happened, which has never happened before or since. A light glow. Remember, he's in absolute underground darkness. A light glow began to shine, and a warming sensation filled the cell and enveloped my weakened, starved frame. I felt strong arms around me, cradling me in the arms of Christ himself. That same voice which I had heard when I had stood against a wall for 2 weeks, at the time when he was being tortured some months earlier. That same voice, he heard it again. I can never describe that voice. Overwrought with love and compassion, Christ spoke to me saying, "My son, I shall never forsake you. My arms are around you, and in them I shall comfort and give you strength." Tears flowed down my cheeks as I was held in the embrace of Christ. I know some readers may think this extreme, but when I was at the point of madness and despair, and he really was at the end of his rope, Christ let me know he had not forgotten me, there huddled in the blackness of a forgotten cell in the bowels of the earth. It was a beautiful, loving embrace and a moment that made all the suffering worthwhile. How I love him. If all men in the world could only know this Christ and his beauty and love. It's beautiful. Hey, I want to remind you, we are having worship services up at the Steamfitters Union building. I call it our Grace Church of Harmony Steamfitters campus. We had 110 cars there last week, and a number of folks who were a little skeptical of it before they came out really loving and feeling like they were really part of the body of Christ. God's blessing us in that on that asphalt in that parking lot. And so, of course, you're welcome to keep watching online, but we'd love to have you come out Sunday morning at 10 o'clock at the Steamfitters Union in the parking lot. All right, God bless you.